Hi guys, thank you all for tuning in and welcome back to Sewing Lara. In this tutorial, I will show you how to create these cute tissue hoodies, which is what I like calling these cases for pocket tissues. Now I buy my pocket tissues in a large packaging, so they are not packed separately in plastic. It's just one wrapping with multiple tissues inside. And I started creating these hoodies so that I can carry in my backpack or in my purse only a few. And I think that these are also a great way how to jump into hand stitching or sewing because it's very simple to create them and they also make a great gift. So let's jump right into this. Let's have a look at our pattern, which you can, by the way, download for free in the download section. This might look complicated if you never worked with your pattern, but I made several colorful sections that should make it a little bit easier for you to recognize what is what. So you will notice that there is this yellow section around the inner big rectangle. That's the so-called seam allowance. So when you cut your fabric and when you want to stitch it through, you have to account for the extra that you will lose by stitching, because the stitch will be placed here and there needs to be a little bit of fabric on this side too. So that's what you have to add basically. The actual size will be this inner rectangle with the light blue and gray sections. So that's the basic seam allowance. And when I say basic, that's because you will lose that much on each of the long side. And then here, either you fold the fabric inwards only once, if it's a fabric that doesn't fray, then you will lose only the yellow section. Or, like in this case, this is a fabric that frays, and I want to fold it twice, you would lose also this pink section in addition to that. So the rectangle needs to be that much longer. So that's the principle of seam allowance. And the way the tissue hoodies are structured is following. So you have here this green rectangle. I made also a line for the center. That's basically this side where you can have an embellishment or none if you don't want any. And then you have here these two sides in light blue, which is these sides. And that's why I have here all these lines. So I have one line for the very center of this whole thing. Then I have the sides, which are these sides. And then I have here a very clear line which marks this center here. And then either you fold in the fabric once or twice. So you will need additional yellow section or additional yellow and pink section. If you would do something like this, which is so-called bias tape, you would not need any of these, but we'll come to that later. So that's the basic for the pattern. Again, you can download the pattern in the download section. I marked everything so that it will be easy for you to follow. Once you cut out the rectangle that you want to work with, I do recommend making marks for these places. So what I always do is, since the pattern has a center, I like folding my fabric in the middle, aligning it nicely and making a small cut with scissors, only like 2 or 3 millimeters on each side. Now I know where the middle is. And then I like taking my pattern, folding it, and placing it like so, a little bit away from the edge. And then I like marking all these lines. And again, making a little cut, because then I will know exactly where I will fold my piece. By the way, there is a tutorial for embroideries, and I have shown in the tutorial also this flower with the twigs, but we're not going to cover that in this video. We are going to focus just on making the tissue hoodies. So now I want to have clean edges. And since this is a fabric that frays, I will have to fold them twice. So I'm going to fray out these loose threads because otherwise they're gonna bother me and they're gonna stick out. And then we'll start with the folding. If you want to have, when you finish your piece, only the right side visible, you would turn your work around and you would fold the edge inwards, meaning right side would be folded towards the wrong side. You do it twice, and then when you would turn your work around, you would have a nice edge made only of the right side of the fabric. I personally like, when it comes to denim, seeing also the wrong side, the way you would normally fold your jeans on the bottom. So I'm gonna fold the fabric upwards. That's just my personal preference. There is basically no good reason behind it besides I like the way it looks. So that is of course up to you. You can fold the fabric inwards like we did, so that it would look like this, or upwards, and then it would look like the upper edge from this point of view. I will do the same on the other side. So I will make my fold, and that way the edge would be clean. I will pin it in place. And when you pin things in place, you can pin at an angle or this way. I find it's easier to stitch when you pin at an angle. And just to be sure that I folded it exactly the amount I need, I will take my pattern, fold this, place the pattern on the top, and make sure that the size is the correct size before I start stitching. What you're gonna do with the edge is entirely up to you. You could hold the fabric like so and use leather stitch in order to stitch this in place, then no stitch would be visible, or you could make back stitch or chain stitch very close to this edge. That's up to you. I decided I will create simply running stitch because I think it looks cool on denim. So that's what I'm gonna do. Just a very simple stitch, but it looks really good. And since this is a really small section, it's gonna hold the edge safely in place. Make sure that the stitches are equally long. Take your time. Make sure they are straight. If anything tangles, simply pull a little bit on the thread. Maybe hold the thread with your finger. Pull it through, untwist the thread, and then continue stitching. Now our edges are finished, and we have to stitch the tissue hoodie here on the side. So it's gonna look like so, but the sides will be stitched together from the inside. And for that, I will turn my work to the right side. So the right side is facing up. I have here on each side a cut for the center, but I put in also pins so that you can see it better on the camera. And now I will align these sections like so, and I will pin them in place. And if you want to, you can grab a sewing crayon and you can mark where your stitch is supposed to be, especially if you're a beginner and if it's challenging for you to make a straight line. It's also sometimes good to grab a guide, and if it's barely visible, just like in this case, simply take a pen and make a line, because it's on the inside, no one's gonna see it. And you can also grab the guide and measure and make sure that both sides are equally long. And now I double threaded my needle again with the yellow denim yarn, and I will follow this line and I will do the back stitch, and that way I will stitch this side together. I'm done with the back stitch on this side, and I still had enough thread in my needles, so without doing the sew up, I went on and started hemming the edge with blanket stitch because the fabric is fraying, so I wanted to hem it nicely. Here is what our piece looks like so far. So I stitched both sides together with a back stitch, and then I hemmed the edges with blanket stitch. And now, before we turn our piece to the right side, I want to stitch together the center about 1/2 inch, because it opens all the way to the back stitch, and when I would turn the tissue hoodie to the right side and I would put tissues in, it would kind of open in the middle slightly, and I find that when I stitch here about 1 centimeter or like 1/2 inch together, it keeps the shape nicely. So I double threaded my needle with a simple light gray polyester thread, and I will do here the letter stitch, and I will stitch together small sections on each side. You could also do the whip stitch if you do it from the inside, because no one's gonna see it. Whatever works for you better. And now that I finished the letter stitch on each side, I'm done, and I can turn our piece to the right side. What I like doing is taking something that's pointy but not sharp. So I have here a painting brush. The end is quite pointy, and I'm gonna push with the end against the edges of the tissue hoodie so that I can shape them so that they look as neat as possible. Then I also like taking the tissue hoodie here where I have the stitch and kind of rolling it back and forth until the side seam flattens. And you can of course go ahead and press your piece, because that way it would look even better. But other than that, we are done, and all we have to do is to fill our little tissue hoodie with pocket tissues. This is a really cute accessory, and I think this would also make a great Christmas or birthday gift. Now let's make the second tissue hoodie. It's gonna be the same principle with the exception of these edges. So when you look at the pattern, I fold away the seam allowances on each edge. So you see there's no extra fabric, so I would not be able to fold this inwards because then it would be too small. But there's a way of how to do it. You can hem this with a bias tape. So bias tape is something that looks like this. It's a fabric, it can be differently wide, that has been folded from each side towards the center once, and then you fold it once more like this. You can make it yourself. There are little forms that will help you make these, or you simply cut out a strip of fabric and pin it in place and press it. That's what I have done. So I will grab this bias tape and I will place it so that each edge will be aligned with the center. And then I will fold the bias tape over it like so. So I'm gonna hold it, turn it to the right side, and I will pin it in place. I will make sure that this edge of the fabric is aligned with the very center of the bias tape. That's very important, so that it's gonna be straight. Now I will cut it off here. And I will stitch it in place. You can stitch it in place again with back stitch, chain stitch, or simply running stitch. When I'm gonna be pinning on the other side, I have to keep in mind that we have a fabric with a pattern, and I want that when I close the tissue hoodie that this is going to be aligned. So I have to play with this a little bit, and it doesn't really work because when I align these lines, I would not have enough bias tape for this side. So I have here another strip of the bias tape. I made quite a lot. The best way how to do this to make sure that it's really exact is once you positioned your bias tape with the pattern on this side, pin this part in place so that it couldn't move, and then align the other bias tape with it like so, and then fold the other edge in and close it, and that way you have the perfect position, and all you have to do now is to pin it in place and stitch it in place. Now that I'm happy with the position of the bias tape, I will start stitching it in place. So I have here this light beige polyester thread that matches the checked fabric, and I'm going to stitch it in again with just running stitch because I think that's good enough for this piece. But of course, again, you can make chain stitch or a back stitch, whatever works for you, whatever you find personally pretty. And now that I've finished the edges of the center, I can finish the hoodie the very same way, just like I did with the denim hoodie. So I'm not gonna film that because it would be very repetitive and the video would end up being too long, but I think at this point you get the idea. I do recommend making lines for yourself on each side so that the edge would be straight, and definitely measure at several places and make sure that the distance between these two lines is the same everywhere so that your end work would be symmetrical. Alright, I finished, so both sides are stitched together with a back stitch, hemmed with the blanket stitch, added the leather stitch in the center, and now let's turn our beige velvety hoodie with the paw print embroidery to the right side. I will have to wipe this away because there's still a little bit of the sewing chalk, because I had to mark the center for the embroidery. And as I said, a tutorial for this embroidery and for the embroidery on the denim tissue hoodie is also a part of this course, so you can check the video out if you're interested. So I'm gonna shape the edges. And I'm gonna place the tissues inside of our tissue hoodie, and then we're done. If you wanted to, you could also make a closure here. There's a way of creating a loop that looks like this. It's in the tutorial for buttonholes. That's something you could position here in the center and then stitch on the other side a small button. I personally don't like having closure on these hoodies because I find it so much easier and faster to just grab inside and pull out the hoodie. But if you would like to have a closure, a loop like this stitched somewhere in the middle would be a perfect solution. So these are the tissue hoodies. Again, it's a great gift and also a very cute accessory. You can embellish them any way you want, or you can just leave them plain. That is, of course, up to you. It's all about personal preference, as I always say. A little reminder, tutorial for these embroideries is also a part of this course, and you will find the drawings in the download section on this homepage. And that is it. I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial and that this tutorial has been helpful. Thank you all for watching and happy sewing!